Hello guys. So in this session now, I'm continuing with our discussion on interpretation of statutes. We're done learning with all the primary rules and the secondary rules of interpretation. We now have to understand the internal aids and the external aids. Now, first, let us understand that what are these internal aids and external aids. See, let us say there is a law, all right, and the court is reading the law. The court is trying to interpret the law. There is one word in one section court is not able to understand. Now, the court needs help. So, what did the court do? What did the judge do? The judge went to section 2 of that particular law, saw the definition section. In the definition section, that word was defined. Court took help from the definition section. Now, to interpret the law, the court needed help, and court took help from section 2 of the same law. So, do you agree that the court found help within the statute itself? When the court finds help, when the court is trying to interpret the provision, and if it finds help within the statute itself, then those aids are called as internal aids because they are within the statute itself. But let's say in the definition section, that word was not defined. So therefore, the court went to the General Clauses Act, and there the word was defined. Court took help from there. So the court was reading a statute, got stuck at one particular place, court needed help. Within the law, it did not find help. So it left the act, went to the General Clauses Act and found help over there. So don't you think this was an external aid? The court has found help in an external source. These are external aids. So internal aids are those aids which the court will find within the act itself, and external aids are those aids which the court finds outside of the act. Of course, the court is first supposed to take help from internal aids only if internal aids are not helping the court enough. Only if the court requires further assistance, only then the court goes to the external aids. Okay, so let us have a discussion on the internal aids and external aids. So what do we know about the internal aids and external aids? By the way, what is the knowledge we already have? When the court is trying to interpret, there are two types of aids to interpretation. One is the internal aids, which we will find within the statute itself, and then we have external aids, which we find outside of the statute. Of course, the court is going to take the help of internal aids first. Only if the internal aids fail the assessee, only the internal aids fail the court, only then court will take help of the external aids. Now, what are these internal aids? Let us try to understand them one by one. There are multiple internal aids. Let's start with the very first one. The first internal aid is a title. See, every law has a name, every law has a title. Now, whenever the court is confused that what exactly does a particular provision mean, the court can come and have a look at the title of the law, and the title may give the court some clarity. See, we are not saying come to the title, all your problems will get solved. We're not saying that. What we are saying is that in case the court is finding any problem, while interpreting the law, the court can take the help of the title of the law. It might be of help. Okay, see, I'll give you an example to help you understand this better. I am showing on your screen over here a law, the name of which is the Supreme Court Advocates Practice in High Courts Act 1951. Now, this is the name of the law. The laws generally have a short title and a long title. Like, see, look at section 1. This act may be called the Supreme Court Advocates Practice in High Court Act. So this is the short title of the act. This is a short title. This is how we are going to refer to the act, the Supreme Court Advocates Practice in High Courts Act. Now, if you look at the long title of the act, there's a long title also, an act to authorize advocates of the Supreme Court to practice as of right in any high court. So this law is having a short title over here and it is having a long title over here. So whenever we are stuck with interpretation, we can have a look at the title. The title will help us understand. Like, for example, when I look at the long title over here, it becomes very clear that this law is about Supreme Court advocates practicing in the High Court. This law is about the right of the Supreme Court advocates to practice in the High Court. So in case while reading this whole law, if the court needs any help with interpretation, the court can have a look at this short title and the long title, and the court will be able to do the interpretation. See, short title only identifies the act. Short title is only used for the purpose of identification. For the purpose of identification means whenever you want to talk about this act, what will you write? What is the name for the act? The name of the act is Supreme Court Advocates Practice in High Courts Act 1951. Okay, so this is a short title of the act. Short title is only for identification. But the long title, this long title which is given over here is actually describing the act. It is telling us what is this law all about. It is telling us that this law is about the Supreme Court judges practicing in High Court. They have a right to practice in High Court. So the short title is only for convenience, but the long title is the one which actually describes the law. The long title can actually be used for the purpose of interpretation. The long title is a part of the act. It is a part of the statute. It can be used as an aid to interpretation. But however, what if there is a conflict? What if a provision of the act and the long title, what if they conflict? Then what will you do? What if the long title and some section of the act, what if they conflict? Then what will you do? Which of the two will prevail? The long title cannot override the plain provisions of the act. So the plain provisions of the act are always superior to the long title. Understanding, everybody? So coming back to my discussion over here, we're talking about the very first internal aid. The first internal aid is title of the act. Generally, laws have a long title and they have a short title. Okay, they have a long title and they have a, one second. Generally, laws have a long title and they have a short title. Why do we have short title? Short title is only to identify the law. Short title is only for the purpose of convenience, only to make it easy for us to identify the law. We have to give it some name. But the long title, it actually describes the law. The long title tells us what is the nature of the law, what is the scope of the law. It actually describes the law. The long title is definitely a part of the statute. It is definitely a part of the statute. You know why I am saying that it is a part of the statute? See, I'll show you the act once again. If you notice, see, the short title is a part of section 1. Section 1 has the short title. So short title is definitely a part of the act. It is a part of section 1. But if you look at the long title is written even before section 1. So therefore, a question may arise that is this long title a part of the act? That is why we are clarifying that yes, it is a part of the act. The short title is definitely a part of the act and is a part of section 1 itself. But however, the long title, it is not a part of any section. It is written even before the first section, but still it is considered as a part of the act. All right, guys. So yes, the short title is also a part of the act. Even long title is a part of the statute. All right. And can it be used for interpretation? Yes, it is an aid for interpretation. It can be used for interpretation. Do you agree it is an internal aid? Yes, isn't it? It's an aid. It's something that we're finding within the statute itself. So it is an internal aid for interpretation. And one more thing, what if there is a conflict? What if the long title of the act and some provision of the act, what if they contradict? If they contradict, which of the two will you give priority? You will give priority to a provision, to the provision of the act. In simple words, the long title cannot override the plain provisions of the act. The long title will always be given more priority when compared to the provisions of the act. Ulta, I said. The provisions of the act will be given more priority than the long title. The provisions of the act will override the long title. The long title cannot override the plain provisions of the act. Understood, everybody? This was our first internal aid, which is the title of the law. So the law has a long title and a short title. Short title is just for the sake of convenience, just to identify the law, and it is generally a part of section 1. It's a part of section 1. Do you remember in General Clauses Act? I'm trying to do some interlinking of chapters now. Try to understand. In the General Clauses Act, do you remember we had learned about what is preliminary? And we said that preliminary is generally section 1 of the law and it contains 4 things. I had given you the hint case. C stands for commencement, that when will this law commence, when will it come into force. A stands for application, this law applies to what. S stands for short title and E stands for the extent of the act. Do you recall this whole discussion? So in the GC Act, we had learnt about preliminary, and preliminary is generally section 1. And are you noticing section 1 is containing the short title? So short title is a part of section 1, and short title is anyways a part of the act. My focus is here about long title. Long title, it is written even before section 1, but it is still considered to be a part of the act, and it can be used for interpretation. It describes the law. It properly tells us what is the scope of the law, what is the nature of the law. It is an internal aid for interpretation, but however, it cannot override the plain provisions of the act. All right, guys. So this was our entire discussion with respect to the first internal aid, which is long title. Now listen to the second internal aid. The second internal aid is the preamble. Now, preamble is something which I don't think we have to discuss too much in detail, because we've already learned about it in full depth in the General Clauses Act chapter itself. Yes, so I'll just give you a quick summary of what we have learned under preamble, just to help you press that refresh button in your memory. What exactly is preamble? The preamble, remember the key words. The preamble expresses the scope, object, and purpose of the law, SOP. It expresses the scope, object, and purpose of the law. It tells us what is this law all about. We had learned the preambles of two laws. I had given you the preamble of Companies Act and NI Act. Companies Act to consolidate and amend the law relating to companies. Then for Negotiable Instruments Act, we said Act to consolidate and Act to define and amend the law relating to promissory note, bills of exchange, and check. So the preamble tells us the scope, object, and the purpose of the act. And whenever we want to know what is the whole intention of the legislature, what is the primary intention of the legislature, why did he even make this act, we refer to the preamble. We've learned about all this. Then we learned that even the preamble, it is a part of the statute. And when do we refer to the preamble, guys? When there is ambiguity, when multiple meanings are possible, when there is ambiguity, when a doubt arises as to which meaning the lawmaker intended, we can come and have a look at the preamble. But even over here, we had said that the preamble will not override the plain provisions of the act, which means same thing. If there is a conflict between the preamble and the plain provisions of the act, it is the plain provisions which will have more priority over the preamble. Right, guys, not spending too much time on preamble, just giving you a quick recap, because we've already covered it in full detail. I think we spent quite a lot of time in our GC Act to discuss this. The most important part of your preamble answer will be that it expresses SOP, scope, object, and purpose of the act. It is a part of the act. Whenever there is any ambiguity, we can refer to the preamble. The preamble is a main source to understand the primary intention of the lawmaker, that why exactly did he even make the law. If multiple meanings are possible and we have to choose one meaning, then how will we know which meaning was intended by the lawmaker? We can come and have a look at the preamble. We are not saying that the preamble is like one-stop solution. We are saying that whenever you get stuck, you can come and have a look at the preamble. Your problem may get resolved. You can come and try. Your problem may get resolved. Whatever doubt you're having may get clarified. Understanding everybody. Like, for example, let's say I'm reading Negotiable Instruments Act. Now, Negotiable Instruments Act, nowhere negotiable instrument is even defined. Okay. So let's say I'm reading the law and I suddenly get a doubt. What is this negotiable instrument? I will come and look at the preamble. Now, the preamble says that this act defines and amends the law relating to promissory note, bills of exchange, and check. So that itself helps me understand that, okay, in this law, negotiable instrument means promissory note, bills of exchange, and check. You're understanding. So when you're reading the law, if we get stuck, if we need any help, if we need to understand the meaning of any word, we can come to the preamble. It may be of help. Okay, guys. So this was your second internal aid, which is preamble. After this, coming to the third internal aid, which is the heading or title of each chapter. The heading or title of each chapter, I'll straight away explain this to you with the help of an example. I'll take you to the Companies Act. Listen to me. Listen. The Companies Act is divided into chapters, guys. Like, for example, we have chapter 2. Heading is Incorporation of Company and Matters Incidental thereto. Under that, you have from section 3 to section 22. Then you have chapter 3, which is about prospectus and allotment of securities. This chapter has the first part public offer, second part private placement. Then we have chapter 4, which is about share capital and debentures. Under this, we have from section 43 to section number 72. So the law is divided into chapters and each chapter is given a name. The law is divided into chapters and each chapter is given a heading. Like for example, if I look at Chapter 2, the heading says incorporation of company and matters incidental thereto. So now I know that whatever sections are there under this chapter, that is section 3 to section 22, these sections are something to do with incorporation of the company. So the heading or the title of the chapter gives us a very brief introduction that what are the sections all about. The sections which are arranged under that particular chapter, what are those sections all about, that I can get to know by looking at the heading of the chapter. All right. Now coming back to my classroom notes over here. So our third internal aid is a heading and title of the chapter. So we know that under the law, sections are grouped together. Sections which belong to one particular topic, they are grouped together under one single heading in the form of chapters. All right. Now, just like how the preamble gives us an introduction to the whole law, same way the heading gives us an introduction for all the sections which are in that chapter. Are you understanding? But even over here, the same thing, the heading cannot override the plain provisions of the Act. The heading cannot override the plain provisions of the Act. The plain provisions of the Act only will be given more priority when compared to the heading. And can heading of one chapter be used to interpret a provision in some other chapter? Of course not. You can use the heading of a chapter only as an aid for interpretation for provisions in that particular chapter. Like for example, you can use this heading over here only to interpret these sections. Can you use this heading to interpret a section from some other chapter? No. So what are the points under heading? Point number 1. Let's summarize, guys. Let's summarize. Point number 1 is that all sections which belong to one particular subject, all sections which belong to one particular section or which belong to one particular object, all sections which are relating to one single topic, they are arranged, they are grouped together under one single chapter. They are grouped together in the form of chapters. And this chapter is given a name, this chapter is given a title, and this chapter is given a heading. Now, this title, this heading, number 1, gives us an introduction. It tells us what are all these sections in this chapter, what are all these sections about. It gives us an introduction, just like how the preamble gives us an introduction for the whole act. The heading or the title of the chapter gives us an introduction for all the sections which are put under that particular chapter. So point number 1, all sections which are dealing with one particular topic, they are grouped together in the form of chapters. Understanding, everybody? All sections which belong to one particular topic, they are grouped together in the form of one particular chapter. All sections which belong to one particular topic, they are grouped together under one chapter, and the chapter is given a title, the chapter is given a heading. Now that title, that heading helps us in understanding what are all these sections about. So this heading will give us an introduction of all the sections which are under that particular chapter. Now, this heading is just like what the preamble is for the whole act. The heading is for these sections. Then after that, we learned that can the heading be used to interpret a section from another chapter? No, we cannot use the heading to interpret another section from another chapter. We cannot use a heading. All right. But however, what if there is a conflict? What if the heading of the chapter and the plain provisions of the act, what if they contradict? Which of the two will you apply? Which of the two will you give priority? The plain provisions of the act. All right. So yes, heading is a part of the statute. It can be used for interpretation, just like how the preamble gives us an introduction for the whole statute. The heading gives us an introduction for the sections which are under that particular chapter. So the heading can be used only to interpret the sections in that particular chapter. It cannot be used to interpret other sections belonging to other chapters. It tells us a very brief introduction that what are all these sections about. So this was a third internal aid, heading and title of the chapter. Now coming to the fourth internal aid. Now this is very interesting. The fourth internal aid, which is about marginal notes. What was your first internal aid, guys? Your first internal aid was title. We had spoken about long title and short title. We said that the long title, yes, it is written even before section 1, but it is a part of the statute and it can be used for interpretation. Then we spoke about preamble, heading and title of the chapter. Now coming to marginal notes. See, what are these marginal notes? First of all, understand the meaning. See, marginal notes are generally summaries, or they are, side notes which are written in the margins. And these marginal notes, they only tell us, they basically they give us a sort of a, they express what is the effect of the sections. They are generally put on the sides of the sections in the act, and they tell us the effect of the section. All right. Now, what happens is that, I'll show you an example straight away to help you get a better clarity. Like, I'm showing you this old law. This is Coal Mines Nationalization Amendment Act 1976. Now, do you see all these things which are written on this right side over here? Insertion of new section 1A, declaration as to expediency of union control. Then, if you see over here, amendment of section 30. Here you have this word repeal over here. Follow my cursor. Here you have Ordinance 3 of 1976. So there are these, little points which are written in the margin, like amendment of section 3. Whatever is written in the sides over here, whatever is written in the margins over here, these are your marginal notes. Now, marginal notes are generally added in the legislature. They are added in the statute after the law is made. After the law is enacted, after it is passed in the parliament, after that only it is generally added. So therefore, marginal notes are not a part of the statute. And because they are not a part of the statute, we cannot use them for interpretation. All right. However, there is one exception. Even the Constitution of India has marginal notes. But in the Constitution of India, the marginal notes were inserted when the Constitution was made. At that time itself, the marginal notes were inserted. So in the Constitution of India, if you see, the marginal notes are a part of the Constitution of India. So to interpret the Constitution of India, I can take the help of marginal notes. But otherwise, generally, we are not allowed to take the help of marginal notes. Understanding, everybody? Yes, so discussing with you about it once again. Over here, we're talking about marginal notes. So one second. So we said that the marginal notes are summaries and side notes which are found on the side of the sections. All right. And what do these marginal notes do? They help us understand what is going to be the effect of these sections. That is what the marginal notes help us understand. But tell me, are they a part of the enactment? No. The marginal notes are not a part of the enactment. Why am I saying they're not a part of the enactment? Because when the law was enacted, at that time, the marginal notes was not a part of the law. The marginal notes were inserted only later after the law was enacted. Only after that they were inserted. So they're not a part of the original enactment. So they're not a part of the law. So we cannot use them for interpretation. They cannot be used as internal aid. They cannot be used for interpretation. But guys, what is that one exception I told you? The one exception is with respect to the Constitution of India. Even the Constitution has marginal notes, but those marginal notes were added to the Constitution when the Constitution was made. At that time itself, the marginal notes were added to the Constitution. So the marginal notes in the Constitution are a part of the Constitution. So therefore, when you're interpreting the Constitution, yes, you can take the help of marginal notes. Understanding, everybody? So this was your fourth internal aid. Now I'm taking you to the fifth internal aid, which is your definition section. Now even definition section is something which I'm not going in detail because I've discussed with you about it fully in the General Clauses Act chapter. Listen, when I'm reading the law, if I come across a word which I'm not able to understand, okay, the first step is going to be, I'm going to look at the definition section in that particular law, right? Like, for example, let's say we're reading the Income Tax Act and we come across the word dividend. Now we're getting confused with what does the word dividend mean. So we'll go to section 2, and in section 2, where we have all the definitions in the Income Tax Act, we have all the definitions. We'll look at the definitions. In clause 22, we'll find the definition of the word dividend, and that's how we will understand the word. So in all the laws, if you see, generally section 2, in some laws, section 3 is your definition section. Now, definitions are of various types. Remember, we spoke about it in General Clauses Act itself. We had spoken about exhaustive definitions. We had spoken about extensive definitions. If the definition has the word means in it, it becomes an exhaustive definition. In that case, the meaning of the word is restricted to whatever is given in the definition. But if the definition has the word includes in it, it's an extensive definition. It's a wide definition. If the definition has the word includes in it, we had learned that the meaning of the word will not be restricted to the definition which is given. Whatever is given in the definition are only examples of the word, but the the meaning of the word will not be restricted to what is given in the definition. There are extensive definitions. And then do you recall, in GC Act itself, I had spoken to you about ambiguous definitions and definitions subject to contrary context also, guys. So we don't have to spend time on this definitions part anymore. Definition section, this part you're already well aware of. Then taking you to your next discussion, your sixth internal aid. Sixth internal aid is the illustrations. Now, if you see the Contract Act, for example, after every section, guys, a nice example, a nice illustration is given inside the act itself. So can we use illustrations for interpretation? Of course we can. Illustrations are a part of the statute. Illustrations, they are a part of the law, they are a part of the statute, and they can be used as internal aid. They can be used as an internal aid. But however, what if there is a contradiction? What if the section and the illustration, what if they contradict? Which of the two will you give priority? Of course, the section. The illustration cannot override the provisions. Understanding, everybody? So illustrations are a part of the law and they can be used for interpretation. But however, there is one small catch. The illustration cannot override the plain provisions of the act. All right. See, I'll show you one example. All right. I am showing you the illustrations from the Indian Contract Act. I'll show you where exactly they are placed. There's something very important I have to discuss with you. See, like for example, look at this section. Look at section 17. Okay. Oh, wait, let me show you section 16, let's say. Now, section 16 is starting over here, guys. And section 16 is ending over here. After section 16, illustrations are given. Now, are these illustrations a part of section 16? No. Section 16 started here. Section 16 ended here. So these illustrations are not a part of the section. The illustrations are given after the section. So illustrations are not a part of section 16. They're not a part of section 16. Section 16 is this much only what I've highlighted for you over here. So illustrations, if you see, they're not a part of the section, but they are a part of the act. And because they are a part of the act, they become an internal aid and we can use them for interpretation. You got it, guys. So this was an interesting discussion with respect to illustrations. Then after this, taking you to the next discussion under our internal aids, the seventh internal aid is your provisos. Now this is going to be important. Even here we'll be seeing examples and we'll be trying to understand. Here we're going to be learning about three things: the proviso, then exception, and finally savings clause. Proviso, exception, and savings clause. See, a proviso starts with the words provided. It starts with the word provided. Okay. Now what happens is, what a proviso does is, there's a rule, there's a section, there's a provision. There's a provision, let's say. Now the proviso will first create an exception. The proviso will first say that this provision will not apply in this case. It will create an exception first. Then for that exception, the proviso will give a special rule. You're understanding? So a proviso will first create an exception. There's a provision. The proviso will say that, okay, this exception will not apply in this case. So it will first create an exception. And then for that exception, it will create a special rule, a special provision for that exception. See, an exception just creates an exception. An exception does not create a special law. Like for example, in capital gains, you learn that capital asset does not include rural agricultural land. Now that's all. Rural agricultural land is an exception. Now, for rural agricultural land, there's no special law. That's all. Capital asset is not going to include rural agricultural land. Rural agricultural land is an exception. Story over. But what a proviso does is, first it will create an exception, and then for that exception, it will create another special provision. So for that exceptional case, the general rule will not apply. A special provision will apply. See, I'll help you understand. I'll show you an example from the Companies Act, okay? Companies Act, if you look at the definition of private companies, you'll understand the proviso concept. I'll show you. Look at this, okay? Section 2, Clause 68 of your Companies Act defines a private company. It says private company means a company having minimum share, paid-up share capital as may be prescribed, blah, 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 it says. Now look at this. This particular point, it's a part of Section 68. Right? And it starts with the word provided. So this, what I'm highlighting for you over here, this is a proviso. It's starting with the word provided. The identification of proviso is that it starts with the word provided. This proviso says, provided that where two or more persons hold one or more shares in a company jointly, they shall, for the purpose of this clause, be treated as a single member. So the section is the proviso is talking about what? Joint shareholders. So first of all, from this definition, the proviso is removing joint shareholders. And for joint shareholders, this proviso is creating a special rule that joint shareholders will be counted as one only. There's a limit, right? In a private company, we can have maximum 200 members. But the proviso is saying if they're joint shareholders, we will count them as one only. So, first of all, the proviso is creating an exception. It is taking out joint shareholders from the section. And for joint shareholders, it is creating a special provision. What special provision? That joint shareholders will be counted as one only. You're understanding, guys? An exception just creates an exception. And for example, rural agricultural land is excluded out of capital asset. That's all. Rural agricultural land is not a capital asset. That's all. It's an exception. Story over. Now, there is no special rule for rural agricultural land. But however, what a proviso does is, it first stops the provision from applying to a special situation. And for that special situation, it creates another special provision. Okay. Then what is this savings clause? Savings clause starts with the words save as otherwise provided. It starts with the words save as otherwise provided. Just like how the word provided is the identification point of a proviso, similarly, save as otherwise provided, this is the way in which this is how we identify a savings clause. Okay. See, do you remember when we were discussing about the primary rules of interpretation, our third rule of interpretation was the rule of harmonious construction. And when we were learning about the rule of harmonious construction, we had learned about subject to, notwithstanding, and without prejudice to. Subject to means I'm a weaker section, you apply other sections, then you come and apply this section. Notwithstanding means I'm a stronger section, first you apply me, then you apply other sections. Without prejudice to means you apply that section also, you apply this section also. Even if both the sections are contradicting, even if both the sections are talking about the same subject matter, you apply the other section also, you apply this section also. That is without prejudice too, guys. Now, what is savings clause? Savings clause, it starts with the words save as otherwise provided. Savings clause, what it actually does, very, very interesting, okay? When like I'll show you an example straight away. I've brought two examples. One is section 152 and 161, and the other is section 21. All the examples are from Companies Act. Okay. Section 152 says that it is the shareholders who are going to appoint the directors. If you look at clause 2, save as otherwise expressly provided in the Act, every director shall be appointed by the company in the general meeting. So section 152 section 152 subsection 2 says that the board of directors, every director will be appointed by the company in the general meeting. Okay. Then we have section 161. Section 161, which talks about alternate director. It says that the articles of a company may confer on board of directors the power to appoint a person other than a person who fails to get appointed as a director in a general meeting as an additional director. So see, there's a contradiction. Section 152 is saying that directors have to be appointed by whom? Directors have to be appointed by the company in the general meeting. Okay. Now, section 161 talks about additional directors also. It talks about alternate directors also. Even they are directors of the company, guys. And they are appointed by whom? They are appointed by the board of directors. So, don't you think there is a clear-cut contradiction? So, section 152 starts, subsection 2 starts with the words save as otherwise expressly provided, which means section 152 subsection 2 is saying that, see, listen, reader, if any other section is telling you that who has to appoint the director, then you follow that other section. If other sections are not applying to your situation, then you apply this section. So, if section 161 is saying that directors have to be additional director and alternate director have to be appointed by board of directors, then additional director, alternate director has to be appointed by board of directors only. don't affect this section. Section 161 is going to stay unaffected. Save as otherwise expressly provided, you can, give this the meaning of unaffected. Save as otherwise provided indicates if any other sections in the law are talking about something else, that will still stay unaffected. You continue to apply that. Some other section is saying that director has to be appointed by board of directors, don't affect that. That will stay unaffected. But other cases, generally, the board of directors, the directors have to be appointed by the company in the general meeting. You're understanding? So this, by putting the word save as otherwise expressly provided, by putting this into the section, the lawmaker is protecting section 161 from getting destroyed. Otherwise, section 161 might have gotten destroyed, guys. So that is why, to protect section 161, they put the word save as otherwise expressly provided. By putting this, the lawmaker is saying that if anywhere else, if I have written that, who has to appoint the directors, then you apply that. If your situation is not falling under any other section, then you come to section 152 subsection 2. In that case, you in all other situations, the directors will be appointed by the company in the general meeting. But if there is some other section which is talking about some other method of appointment, then you follow that. So other sections should not be affected because of section 152 subsection 2. Because of this section, other sections should not be affected. That is the meaning of save as otherwise expressly provided. Understanding, everybody? So proviso, what does a proviso do? A proviso first creates an exception, and then for that exception, it creates a special rule. An exception just creates an exception. And a savings clause protects other sections from getting destroyed. Savings clause says that let the other provisions stay unaffected. I'll give you one more example. Section 21. Section 21 of Companies Act says, save as otherwise provided in the Act, document or proceedings requiring authentication by a company may be signed by any KMP. So section 21 is saying that whenever on any document, company's authentication is required, in all those places, KMP will sign. Wherever company's authentication is required, KMP is signing. But section 21 starts with the word save as otherwise provided, which means section 21 is saying if any other section in the Act says that some other person has to sign, that will stay unaffected. Like section 46, share certificate. Section 46 very clearly says who has to sign share certificate. So if some other section is telling you who has to sign the document on behalf of the company, that person only will sign. But if your situation is not falling under other sections, then you come to section 21. You're understanding? So by writing section 21, by writing save as otherwise provided in section 21, we are protecting section 46 from getting destroyed. So we're protecting other sections from getting destroyed. So this is savings clause. How do you identify a savings clause? It starts with the words save as otherwise provided. Crystal clear. This was our seventh discussion, our seventh internal aid. Now I'm taking you to the eighth internal aid, which is again a very important internal aid. Our next discussion is going to be about the explanation. The eighth internal aid, which is about explanation. See, even for explanation, let me show you an example. I'll show you section 20 of your Companies Act. Look at this. So if you look at section 20 of your Companies Act, it talks about service of documents. Okay. And section 20 says that we can send documents to the company by multiple modes: registered post, speed post, or courier. See, we have the word courier over here. Now, I don't know what does the word courier mean. I'm getting confused. Now, within the section itself, if you see, they have given an explanation. For the purpose of this section, the term courier means a person or agency which delivers the document and provides proof of delivery. So, I was reading the section. I got confused. I did not understand what does the word courier mean. Now, within the section itself, they have given an explanation. You're understanding? So, explanations are a part of the section, and explanations can be used for interpretation. Through the explanation, the lawmaker is trying to explain the meaning of a particular word or meaning of a particular text in that section. Through the explanation, either the lawmaker will include something or he will exclude something, but because of explanation, we cannot widen the scope of the section. Understanding, I'll repeat once again, an explanation, it can be used as an internal aid. It can be used as an internal aid for interpretation. It is added into the section itself. It is attached to the section itself. It explains the meaning of a particular, it explains the meaning of a particular text in that section. And through the explanation, the lawmaker will either include something or he will exclude something. But because of explanation, we cannot widen the ambit of the section. Because of the explanation, we cannot widen the scope of the section. We cannot increase the scope of the section. All right. Understanding, everybody? So, and also one more thing, always remember the explanatory statement, the explanation. What is the whole objective of the explanation? The whole objective of putting the explanation is to clarify, to remove ambiguity, to remove confusion, to give meaning, to fill the gap. In case there is any gap, in case people are not understanding a particular phrase, to fill the gap, to give the meaning, to give the intention. So explanation is an internal aid. It explains the meaning of text in the section. It will either include something or it will exclude something, but it cannot increase the scope of the section. Why do we include the explanation? What is the objective of putting the explanation in the section? The objective is just so that we can clarify some confusions, we can clarify some vagueness, we can remove the ambiguity, and through the explanation, the lawmaker is very clearly communicating what his intention is. He is very clearly communicating through the intention, through the explanation, what his intention is. Understanding. This is explanation. Then comes our ninth internal aid, which is schedules. See, now after the act, after all the sections are over, we have the schedules, right? Like for example, in Companies Act, we have 7 schedules. After all the sections are over, the schedules are arranged. So schedules are a part of the act. They are clearly a part of the act. They are arranged after the sections, but they are a part of the act, and they can be used as an internal aid of interpretation. But however, again the same thing, if there is a contradiction, if a provision of the law and the schedule, if they contradict, between them, which of the two will you give priority? Of course, the provisions. The schedule cannot override the plain provisions of the act. And then coming to the last internal aid, the last internal aid is read the statute as a whole. Read the statute as a whole. What does this mean? This indicates, see, whenever you're reading the law, don't read each section separately. Instead, read the whole law together as one single document. Because when you do that, you will read one section, that section will help you understand another section, that section will help you understand another section. So always keep the context of the whole law in your mind. Don't read the section in parts. Don't treat each section as an independent provision altogether. Instead, read them all harmoniously. Read the whole statute together, because then one section will help you understand the other section. Understanding, everybody? Yes, so you should always read the law together, and you should not read each section separately and independently. You're supposed to read it all together. Only then you will be able to give effect to the whole law as such. So these are your 10 internal aids. Your first internal aid, come on, let's revise them all. Your first internal aid was title. We said the title, we have 2 titles, long title and short title. Short title is only for the purpose of identification. It's only for the sake of convenience. The long title, in fact, the long title is the one that actually helps us understand that what is this law all about. The long title describes the act. The long title is a part of the statute and it can be used for interpretation. But however, if there is a contradiction between the provision and the long title will not override the plain provisions of the act. I had given you the example of Supreme Court Advocates Practice in High Court Act. Then we saw about preamble. Preamble expresses the scope, object, and the purpose of the act. It tells us what is the intention of the lawmaker. It is a main source to understand the primary intention of the lawmaker, that why did he even make the law. Preamble is a part of the statute, and whenever there is any ambiguity, whenever multiple meanings are possible, and you're confused which interpretation to pick, we can have a look at the preamble. The preamble may help us solve our interpretation issues. But however, it shall not override the plain provisions of the act. Then after that, we learned about heading and title of the chapter. We said just like how preamble gives us an introduction for the entire law, similarly, the heading or the title of the chapter gives us an introduction for all the sections which are arranged in that particular chapter. We said that all the sections which belong to one particular topic are arranged under one single chapter, and the chapter is given a heading. So that heading will give us like an introduction, or that heading will tell us that what are all these sections all about. So we can use the heading, to interpret the sections in that particular chapter. But can we use the heading of one chapter to interpret another section which is belonging to another chapter? No. Then we learned after this about marginal notes. We said marginal notes are written in the sides of the law and they help us understand the effect of the sections. But marginal notes are not a part of the law when they were enacted. They were introduced in the law only later after the law was enacted. So therefore, marginal notes are not considered to be as a part of the statute and hence they cannot be used for interpretation. However, an exception is the Constitution of India. The Constitution also has marginal notes, but those marginal notes were included in the Constitution when it was made at that point itself. So the Constitution's marginal notes are a part of the Constitution and they can be used for interpretation. Then we learned about definition section. We said whenever we are getting stuck with any word in the act while we are reading it, of course we can come to the definition section and we can take help of the definition section. So definition section is one of the most important internal aids. Various types of definitions we have: extensive definitions, exhaustive definitions, ambiguous definitions, and definitions subject to contrary context. Then we spoke about illustrations. Illustrations are a part of the act. They are not a part of the section, but they are a part of the act and we can use them for interpretation. However, they should not override the plain provisions of the act. Then we had an extremely important discussion about proviso, exception, and savings clause. The proviso first creates an exception and then for that exception, it creates a separate rule. The exception just creates an exception. And what does the savings clause do? Savings clause protects other sections from getting destroyed. Then we spoke about explanations. Explanations are included into the section itself. They either include something from the section or they exclude something from the section, but they do not widen the scope of the section. They are included in the section to explain the meaning of some text of that section. But however, and then we learned that why are explanations even inserted? What is the objective? Objective is to give some clarifications, to remove vagueness, and to very clearly communicate what is the intention of the lawmaker. Then we learned about schedules. We said that schedules are a part of the act. They are arranged in the law after the sections are over. They are arranged in the law, and yes, the schedules are a part of the act, but they should not override the plain provisions of the act. And finally, we said read the statute as a whole, because when you read the statute as a whole, one section will help you interpret the other section, and so on. So you should not read each section as a separate, independent body altogether. You should read the whole law together as if it is one single document. Okay, so these were our 10 internal aids. Now, just like how we have internal aids, we also have external aids. First of all, the judge will try to, find some internal aid which will help him in the interpretation process. But if the internal aids fail the judge, then only the judge will come to the external aids. The external aids that we will be learning about, these external aids are found outside of the statute. Now, what are these external aids? I'll explain them to you one by one. The first external aid is historical setting. Historical setting as in, please go back in time when the law was made. At that point of time, what was the social condition existing in our country? Long back when the law was made, at that time, what was the social condition existing in our country? What was the problem existing in our country to solve which the law was made? Please go back in time and see the parliament discussions which were made to, bring this law into force. Go back in time and look at the research papers of the experts who made the law. You're understanding? So in historical setting, we are asking the judge to go back in time to the period when the law was made and see what was the conditions existing at that point of time. What are the kind of discussions which are happening in the parliament with regards to this law? All of this might help the judge in interpreting the law. That is the first external aid, historical setting. The second external aid is consolidating statutes and previous laws. See, previous laws you know very well. Like, for example, if you're reading the Companies Act 2013 and if you need help with interpretation, you can take help of Companies Act 1956. You can take help of the previous law. Previous law, the earlier law, you can take help of that. But what is consolidating statute? Like, for example, GST is a consolidation of excise duty, service tax, VAT, CST. It's a combination of all of these. It's a consolidation of all of these. So when I'm reading the GST Act, if I need any interpretation or if I need any help, I can take the help of the earlier laws, that is service tax rules. I can take the help of the Excise Act. I can take the help of the VAT rules. So you're understanding. So GST is a consolidating act. So to interpret the GST law, I can take the help of the laws which are being consolidated in the form of GST. That is, GST is a consolidation of excise, VAT, service tax. So to understand GST, I can take the help of the earlier excise rules, the earlier service tax rules, and the earlier VAT rules. So this is the second external aid. To interpret a law, you can take the help of consolidating statutes and you can take the help of previous laws. Then comes our third external aid, which is usage. See, wherever we use the word usage, usage refers to custom. Usage refers to custom. See, if a particular phrase or if a particular section has been interpreted in a certain manner since years and years, then it becomes a custom. And the courts are now expected to continue to interpret that provision in that same manner only. Understanding, everybody? Courts should not change the interpretation. Unless it is totally required, they should not change the interpretation. And this is something which you are well aware of. Even in the secondary rules, we have spoken about this. Right, guys? So usage is nothing but custom. The court can see if in the past, is there any custom? Have the courts been interpreting this provision in a certain manner since years and years? If yes, the court will continue to follow the same interpretation only. Then the fourth external aid is earlier acts and analogous acts. Earlier acts and analogous acts. See, let us try to understand this simple only. What does the word analogous act mean? Analogous acts are those acts which are pari materia. But what is pari materia? Pari materia means the same subject matter. See, let us say we have two laws. I'll give you just one random example, okay? We have two laws, law 1 and law 2. And both the laws are talking about the same subject matter. Now you can say that these two laws are pari materia. You can say that these two laws are analogous. Why analogous? Because they are talking about the same subject matter. Understanding. So analogous acts means that both the laws are pari materia. Pari materia means they are talking about the same subject matter. So when you have a case like this, if there are two laws which are analogous, then in that case, you're supposed to read these two laws as if they are one single law. Which means to interpret law 1, you can take the help of law 2. To interpret law 2, you can take the help of law 1. Are you understanding? So when the laws are analogous, that is when they are pari materia, when they're talking about the same subject matter, we read both the laws as if they are one single unit, as if they are one single system, as if the laws explain each other. So we can use law 1 to interpret law 2. We can use law 2 to interpret law 1. So this is your fourth external aid, that you can take the help of other statutes as well. So in the fourth external aid, I'm taking the help of other statutes. To interpret law 1, I'm taking the help of law 2. To interpret law 2, I'm taking the help of law 1. Now, what if both these laws have some contradiction? If they have a contradiction, we'll see which law came later. The later law will prevail over the earlier law. Simple. If there's a contradiction between these two laws, then the later law will prevail over the earlier law. All right. Then comes our fifth external aid, which is the dictionary definitions. See, listen. There is a word that the court is not able to understand in a particular section. The court saw the definition section. In the definition section, it was not explained. The court went to case laws. In the past judicial decisions, none of the judicial decisions talk about that word. Even the GC Act is not defining the word. Now the court has no choice. Court will go to the dictionary and court will try to find the meaning of the word from the dictionary. But however, please remember, if the word is a technical word, then we're supposed to use technical dictionaries. We're supposed to use legal dictionaries. Understanding? So, see, but then can the court directly jump to the dictionary definition? No. First, the court should try to find the meaning from the definition section given in that particular law itself. If the definition section is not defining the word, then the court will see, do we have any judicial decision in the past where that word has been discussed? If no, then the court will see the meaning given in GC Act. If none of these are helping, only then the court can go to the dictionary and then the court can take the dictionary meaning to interpret the law. Okay, and then comes our last external aid, which is foreign decisions. Can the court can the court take the help of foreign decisions while interpreting the law? See, listen, Indian court decisions, of course, the court can use. But what about foreign decisions? See, the foreign decisions, they don't bind the court. See, the court can take guidance from them, but the court is not bound by them. You're understanding? Earlier, if you see, before independence, we used to rely a lot upon foreign case laws, especially the English court case laws, because many of our laws were based on the English law. Like, for example, when you learn about the Contract Act, when you learned about Contract Act in your CA foundation, you learned about so many English case laws, Carlyle versus Carbolic Smoke Ball Company. Your first case law, guys, Balfour versus Balfour. All of these are foreign case laws. So before independence, yes, we were using foreign case laws because Indian law was based on the Britishers' rule only, anyways. But however, today, if you see, the foreign decisions can guide the court, but the foreign decisions don't bind the court. So the court can take guidance from them, but the court doesn't necessarily have to follow them. You're understanding? So the primary importance has to be given to the Indian law. Then importance has to be given to Indian decisions. If you're able to sort the interpretation issue with all this, no need to even look at the foreign decisions. Only if Indian decisions are also not helping us, if we don't have a choice, then okay, we can take guidance from foreign decisions. Okay, so 6 external aids we have, guys. Our first external aid was historical setting. Second external aid was consolidating statutes and previous laws. Third external aid was usage. Fourth was earlier acts and analogous acts. Fifth was dictionary definitions. And sixth was foreign decisions. So these are all of our external aids. Okay, so with this, we have learned about the internal aids as well as the external aids fully. Now listen, coming to the final concluding part of this chapter, see, various times we say that, even in Companies Act, even in LLP Act, we've discussed about penalties. That, if there is an offense, this penalty has to be paid, this fine has to be paid. So whenever we pay penalties, whenever we pay fine, it goes to whom? Who's the recipient? Whenever we pay penalties, who is the recipient? The penalty money will go to whom? The penalty money will go to the coffers of the state. This is the legal terminology, coffers of the state. Coffers of the state is, in very simple words, is nothing but the cash box of the government. Are you understanding? So whenever we have to pay penalties, if the law specifically mentions the penalty will go to whom, the penalty will go to that person. But if the law is silent, then the penalty will go to the coffers of the state. That is, the penalty will go into the account of the government. Okay. Then listen, this is my first extra point. Second extra point. Let's say the judge, he is trying to interpret the law. Okay. And he finds a provision. And that provision is very unreasonable. Now, can the court change the law? Can the court make his own law? Can the court say, oh, such a terrible law, I'm not going to apply this? No. The court's role is not to make the law. That is the role of the parliament. So the court cannot make the law. Whatever law has been made by the parliament, the court has to interpret the law and apply the law. So the court cannot step into the shoes of the parliament. The court cannot make the law. The court does not have the jurisdiction to do that. And the court cannot decide that this law is just, this law is unjust, this law is fair, this law is not fair. The court does not have the jurisdiction to decide that. Only the legislature, that is only the parliament, only they can alter the law, only they can modify the law. The courts have to apply the law, the courts have to interpret the law, and they have to apply the law. Even if the court thinks a particular law is unfair, the court has to still apply the law. Okay, and finally, whatever we have learned about interpretation in this chapter, the same thing will also apply to interpretation of deeds and documents. Even over here, the same rules, the same primary rules, the same secondary rules, first do literal construction, then do reasonable construction, do harmonious construction if there is a conflict between two provisions of the deed. So whatever we have learned in this chapter will also apply to deeds and documents. Interpretation of deeds and interpretation of documents also the same the same rules only will apply. All right, so this is it with our entire chapter on interpretation of statutes. Now one more final video I will be putting up on this chapter, giving you a thorough revision of the whole chapter. All right, thank you guys, bye bye.